recollection for most of you, because years before her first book, Aggie the Spedabed, got published, most of us knew her as a beloved storyteller across the state of Georgia and the South. But since that time, she's performed at the Kennedy Center, on Broadway, over NPR, listed in her press packet. She has received the Jane Addams Peace Association Honor Book Award, the Christopher Award in the category of Books for Young People, the Bolaño Bugazzi Award, and the Parents' Choice Gold Award. And while these awards are impressive, I think the most impressive thing about Carmen Deedy is the person behind the writer. Some years ago, I had the privilege, along with several of my students, of taking Carmen to a late-night dinner after she had presented here at Berry College. And that night, she teased out of us our personal stories and shared her own. It was an evening of a lot of mirth, because you can't be around her long without enjoying her sense of humor. But when I reflected about that night, I realized that she had told us the stories that we needed to hear in order to encourage us that night. And over the years, I've watched her books do the same thing. She tells us the stories in her books that we need to hear. It's the crafting of that perfect little phrase that just sticks in your head long after the reading and causes you to think about the things you do that intrigues me with her books. For example, in The Secret of Old Zeb, she speaks of facing your monster and not his shadow, and of dreams that are just too big to be kept in bottles. In Aggie the Spedabed, she told us everything comes from something, nothing comes from nothing. And that, to me, in my Protestant work ethic, said get off your behind and do something, you know. And it spoke to me of our interrelatedness. In The Yellow Star, the legend of King Christian X of Denmark, she writes at the conclusion of that book, and once again, in the country of Denmark, there were only Danes. That speaks to us of the unity that we need to face dark things in our world and our lives. Perhaps my favorite book of hers, though, is The Last Dance, and in that she reminds us that those we love are never really gone as long as their stories are told. In chatting with her a few moments ago, I found out she's been working through the Smithsonian with refugee children for their stories, and so I can't wait to see what other stories she'll be telling us that we need to know over the next few years. Join me in welcoming Carmen Deedy.
Which means you have to be a little daft to handle these, because you don't really handle these. It's sort of like handling language. You have to do it very delicately, and sometimes you should suit up. When I was asked by Barry to come back, I was so delighted. My daughter Erin is a student here, so it was really wonderful for me, and she's just at that wonderful age where it's so horribly embarrassing. I'm not looking at you. Look, they don't know where you are. She's the least middle child of all middle children. No, that's all right. That's okay. She's offering to share a story about me. You can do that later when you get like it. But when they asked me about this afternoon and what I wanted to speak on, of course there are always stories to tell. Family stories and folklore and legend. I love stories. I was born in Havana, Cuba in 60. And I came to the U.S. to Decatur, little tiny town, also dominated by, and I say that in the best sense, defined, I should say, more than dominated, by a university, Agnes Scott College. Where her sister went. But where I grew up, sort of a border dweller. Do you know what I mean? Those folks on the edge of the world that we see in the market, or passes with 7 children in a car, most of them wedged in together with a couple hanging out the windows. That was childhood in that tiny southern town in the 60s, a town that threw open actually its doors to us in, as an adult now, I see, not an unsurprising way. And then I grew up here. I grew up in Georgia, Decatur, Georgia, to eventually marry and have 3 daughters and write books. However, as enticing as it would be to tell you all these personal stories, you can find this stuff probably on the web. You can Google. What I'd like to talk about today is, well, the thing that's been sort of my love in a silent campaign that's growing more vocal. The title of today's presentation is Haven, and it's about libraries. Any bibliophiles at the Southern Writers Conference today? Know your audience. When I was, about 10 years old, I remember my mother dropping me off at the Maud and Burris Library in Decatur. It's now the Decatur Library. I don't like the name as much. It's missing the definition that woman gave it with her own character, if you've ever heard of Miss Harris. We were all told about her. She was the giant on whose shoulders the library stood. I didn't know that when I was 10. I went there because I loved the smell. When you walked into these old libraries, they had highly polished wooden floors that creaked as you stepped on them. They smelled of turpentine and wax and books that hadn't been treated yet. There was no such thing as acid-free anything, including librarians. There was a spiral staircase just wide enough for 2 children to go up shoulder to shoulder, where if you were very good, you were allowed to look at the books in the reference section, with at least one librarian standing guard as sentinel. And up there, they also had the microfiche, where you could blow up newspapers of yesteryear and learn all kinds of interesting things about families like the McEachers and the Cunninghams and the Harrises. I was introduced to that world by a tall, lean, angular woman. She had a wire hanger for sort of a collarbone right here. You knew her. In the 60s, her hair was sprayed into an unnaturally red football helmet. Her nails were buffed, not polished, her lips a pale pink number 56 Revlon pink. 1/4-inch heels with shiny pennies in the loafers. When I first checked out books, Miss Hughes looked at me and said, "Do you have a library card?" "How you going?" I still talk my love by there. Just a moment. I got to fill in my own library card. You know how to spell your name? Jason. Yes, ma'am. I pushed that number 2 pencil in straight, unforgiving lines to little indentations in that paper library card. And then she said, "The children's section is through that door." Well, it wasn't really a door. It was wide open, like a church window. Inside was the sanctum sanctorum, the holy of holies of the library, the children's section. Inside waited Tasha Tudor and E.B. White and Roald Dahl. Oh, but I didn't know them yet. I went in and wandered around for a while, found a book that looked interesting enough, and stepped back out and got in line with several other children. I watched them each fill out a card, and then I watched her go through the mysterious ritual of pulling out a stamper, setting it, and then saying to his child, "What day is that?" "July 9th. "When will you have it back?" "July 9th. "When will you have July 8th. It was my turn. I put down Trumpet of the Swan. I didn't know what it was about, but my mother told me a story about 12 swan boys and a dancing princess, or maybe it was 12 princesses. And they met 12 brothers. I couldn't remember, but I loved swans. And sometimes they had them at the little lake that we would go to, just north of the city. Oh, you can't read this. Why not? It's a chapter book. Okay. What's that mean? Why don't we get a picture book? I want this book. Are you sure you can read this book? Yes. Very well. Take this card and write your name on it. Back to the painful writing. I was 28 before I discovered I was dyslexic. It took a Wexler adult intelligence test to tell me what I'd known most of my life, which was that I saw the world a little to the right, or maybe the left. And then I handed my card back and watched her. Does that say July 9th? And you will have it back July 8th. Modeling, it's a beautiful thing. You can tell me all about it when you bring it back. That is, if you can read it as you say you can. I can read it. I'm going to show you I can read it, lady. My name is Miss Hughes. Miss Hughes. There was an imperceptible smile, perhaps, or it might have been a wince. Thank you very much. And you all, she looked back at the card. Miss Carmen. Carmen. This was a new sound for Decatur, Georgia in the 1960s. Calm. You got hair in your nose. You ever seen that happen to an adult? When the upper pearly whites secure themselves in a clasp on the lower lip right there? I will see you on the 8th. Just quit. I waited outside and I struggled. Oh boy, did I struggle through that book. She was right. It was probably a little higher than my reading level at 10 anyway, as a second language speaker and, well, a struggling, emerging, what's the word? Reluctant reader. Well, I don't like that term. I wasn't reluctant, I was eager, by God and by golly and by gum. I love Southern business. But things are as they are. I like real stories. I had such a hard time with that book that when I came back on the 8th, she was with other children. I didn't want anybody to hear me. Miss Hughes. I'll be right with you. Oh, well, it's Trumpet of the Swan. You can say that. It's easier than that, huh? You're a funny child. Did you like the book? When she came down, it was like seeing those old rulers. They were actually yardsticks. My father had them. Do you remember that? And they up to 6 inches. They were beautiful. They were so fun. They were a staff. You part the Red Sea with. That was just like, she came down. What's wrong? I'm not finished. Well, you have one more day. It's not going to be enough. Well, you can check it out again. You're kidding. That's when I learned the beauty of multiple checkouts. I checked out Trumpet of the Swan the rest of that summer. And at the end of the summer, she told me all about E.B. White. Well, probably don't remember much of it. I've gone back and filled in the gaps, so I don't know what she told me when I read up. what a fellow. I mean, who hasn't read Strunk and White? Elements of Style. Everything you know about language in a book, that thick. Efficiency. I was probably 12 before I discovered Charlotte's Web. I loved that library. Miss Hughes scared most people, but we found an amiable companionship with each other, the kind that comes when the most unlikely people discover a common love of a thing. We loved books. One afternoon, she told me that all these books were her best friends. But you're gonna write to talk to. She said, oh, they talk to me all the time. They just don't talk back. Forget it. Well, I was 10 naive, folks. They had so much to say to her. And of course, remember at that age, you believe that teachers, librarians, administration, they live in these buildings. That is their home, it is their place of rest. Food appears magically through invisible hands. So I never imagined her anywhere else. But I remember how she told me that when she looked out, it was like looking at a city of people. There were old ones in tattered clothes that had to be handled delicately and not moved often. Old people don't like that. There were young ones, long and lean. There were some that were stout. There were paperbacks. They were the fly-by-night friends. They didn't last long. You could usually tell them by their cover. Read them. Judge them. I grew up with a sense that books had souls. That a book was a thing that when they sat in your room and one was missing, it made you anxious. There was one right there. Who took it? And then you went throughout the house demanding of everyone, who took my book? The little one. And you would call out its name because, like living things, they had names. This little introduction is by way of saying that we're in big trouble because children's libraries are changing in ways that I don't believe are good for our children. I don't think I have a messianic calling for this, folks. Don't misread me. I'm one sort of mouthy children's author, but I do have, because I have a Cuban mother, opinions. And I think that perhaps those of you in here have them too. I've been visiting children's libraries for 15 years now. And over the last decade alone, I have seen what was once a single computer become a wall of computers, become a bank of computers. And the retreat of the books has been slow but steady. Children come in and use technology as they should. This is their generation. I'm not entirely a Luddite, although I have managed to swing a hammer once or twice with deadly aim towards a PC. As you remember, the Luddites in the Industrial Revolution took hammers to machines, thinking they were going to ruin the world. Imagine that. Computers are important. E-books may even have their place in the world, I shudder to think. However, I did it a minute ago, don't think back. However, children have in their daily lives so much interaction with things that don't respond back. They have MP3s and DVDs and VCRs and iPods and iBooks and buzzing and clicking and ringing and faxing and people. We were not prepared for this. We have evolved slowly, have we not, with the changes that come. And so when I walk into these libraries now, this is their world. So is it maybe that we should release the book, or it becomes a quainter part of the world that 20, 50 years from now will be something that we talk about, the way our grandparents discussed the Model T. I know that it's probable that the first time someone scratched on papyrus, somebody's mother said, "There goes storyteller." However, is it not also true that when television came along, several people shook their heads and said, "There went radio." A radio is still with us, but it is not the power it once was. We might turn it on when we're in the car, occasionally. Maybe in the morning to listen to NPR, if you're among the faithful. Or any time NPR is on, I kid. However, I think that to be watchful, to be aware is important. But why? My own daughter's next to this. Why? I am a sentimentalist to a degree, but I'm also a pragmatist. And I think, first I want to recommend a wonderful book, the Gutenberg Elegies. The subtitle is The Fate of Reading in an Electronic Age. While I was torpedoing through the world the last few years, I discovered it. It sort of just fell into my hands after I was talking to young people about books. And he makes a couple of remarkable points. Why is reading, the reading of a book, so important? Why do those of us that love it? Is it the act, the rote act, the familiarity? Who in here doesn't know that feeling of sitting in the car when you've just walked out of the bookstore, you reach into the bag, you crack the binding, you smell the printer's ink, your finger runs along the page, and then your eye, now trained as a decoder, begins the process that once was so difficult and now is so facile. And content flows in until slowly the store, the parking lot, the very seat, the book in your hands begins to fade. And you are in that place. And if someone were to walk up and go, "Hey lady, your lights are on," you would right to the roof. Because you had left the space that you were in. Books allow us to move at our own pace. Books download the minute we open them. They never crash. They don't get a virus unless you sneeze on them. They don't need a power source, no batteries. They have personality, as I said. Each one, as Miss Hughes taught me, each one of them has its own familiar shape and size. I had a woman come to me once after a speech and said, "I read Little Women when I was about 12 years old. It was an old beat-up copy. We were very poor." I said, "She said it was missing the front cover." I said, "I'm a professor now, and I have a beautiful collection of books. I'm a bibliophile, and I buy them instead of food." And I said, "Keep going, honey." And she said, "This is my favorite book, and now my mother can't find it." And there were little beads of sweat across her brow and upper lip like sap on a skinned pine. And I thought, what is this disease that we have? Why is it that we love books the way we do? And why is it necessary to still have an oasis of quietude, a place of stillness? Because look around us at our world. Are we not in a place where everything happens in a nanosecond? Where people who have positions of great decisions are making them quickly and sometimes, perhaps without not enough contemplation. Faster. And I'll say, I may be the last old woman in the world, but I hope there's company. Faster is not always better. Faster sometimes is just faster. So I called my mother, and my mother's name is Esther. Actually, her name is Esther. Hilda Esther Pons de Acre. And I said, "Mom, I'm working on a picture book, and it's about libraries and computers and books." And she said, "Jess, what's your problem?" And I said, "Well, with mother, sometimes faster is better, It's kind of chase me." I said, "I can't quite figure out what it is that I'm saying." I told her the briefer version, the truncated version of what you just heard about the schools and the libraries. And she said, "Well, these technology things, I knew it was strong when I saw it coming." I said, "Oh, geez, okay. Ma, don't make me take the opposite position just because you're so antagonizing. Excuse me." "Okay, you can play the devil's advocate if you want to. See, then you will understand your own position because you'll be arguing it. She's a beautiful woman. I said, "Okay, well, here, right? Jess, just like fire. I went, boom! I love this woman. Just like fire. You know, when the first caveman got that flint going, the first spark flew, and the first piece of dry kindling went, there was no turning back. You don't undiscover something. It enters the world and it's with us. So in a way, technology is with us always now, but like fire, it can warm us, right? Or it can burn our house down. And when I hung up the novel, I said, you know, Mom, so what's this mean? So what, do you remember the Library of Alexandria? About 280, yeah, the Great Burning, like 400,000 priceless scrolls, the wisdom of the ages up to that time left in ashes because, well, there are many, whether you want to go the Caesarean route or the other, not this kind, but this kind. Semantics are tricky. The library burned nonetheless. She said, well, you know what my mom said. I said, well, then there better be a keeper of the flame. So maybe that's our job. Maybe that's where we stand, with our children and with their libraries. Maybe that is what the children's librarian does now. Keeps an eye on that fire. The children will find the machines. They dazzle them, don't they? They make light and sound, and they have games. And they do much of the work for us. And I am guiltiest of all. If there's something I need to know in a hurry, Google. But there's something else about a book. It's one last thing. A book has something that we usually, this word we usually, I think, I do reserve for people. A book is intimate. A book opens itself to you, and it says, take me. And we know that we can. So I'm going to leave you a story about intimacy that doesn't have to do with books, but that I love so much. It has to do what I tell you. This is called What's in the Name. It's a mother's story. It happened just a few months ago when my mother was diagnosed with cancer, Esther. We didn't have the diagnosis yet. We were at Piedmont Hospital, which was a fantastic hospital. The breast center was incredible. However, in the end, institutions as good as the particular person that represents it. And that particular day was a very difficult day for us. We'd been at the hospital for over 8 hours. My mother is 74. My father's 81. He'd been in the waiting room the entire time. I kept running out and saying, itchy. I kept running out and saying, Pop, go get something to eat. It'll be another hour. I was calling the girls. I don't know anything yet. They were calling us. I don't know anything yet. My mother was sitting patiently throughout the first 1 hour in a paper dress. She's tiny now. She's gotten smaller with age. She's like a little hollow-boned bird, but larger than her some physical parts, figuratively speaking. She was up on the table right at the end of this 8.5-hour hell period when a nurse popped her head and said, "Doc, will be right here." Now, we'd seen a series of doctors. The young man that came in we hadn't seen yet. He was a young oncologist. I could almost still sort of smell the ink on his certificate. He was barely shaving, that young. But that's okay, because Esther was sharp enough for both of them, as you'll see. He walked in and he had a roster of things, well, a clipboard filled with, lists of things and paperwork. He flipped some of it back. He looked at me first and said, "Mrs. Agra." I said, "No." The woman in the paper dress. I said, "I'm Mrs. Deedy. This is my mother." "Oh," he told me, "I'm sorry, it's been a long day." I said, "I understand. It has for us, too." My mother looked at him, and before she could speak, he said, "As is the way now, we are in a hurry. We have things to do. We have many important things, don't we? So sometimes things have to be done quickly." "Mrs. Agra, I'm Dr. We'll call him Mason. I'm Dr. Mason. You have cancer. It's a tumor grade 3, very serious. We were going to operate as quickly as possible. She put one hand up. I felt as if I'd had a heart punch. I looked over and I thought, that's it? There's no preamble? There's, let's talk for a moment. Do you have anyone else here? I like your paper dress. It matches your eyes, anything. But before I could speak, that little hand, the one with the fingers that all go this way, came up and stopped it. And she said the most surprising thing. A non sequitur, which is not unusual for her. She put her right hand out after she lifted her left and said, my name is Esther. And he looked just a bubble shy of plum for a moment, you know. And he looked at me, I looked at him like, you're on your own, gal. He took a breath, and he straightened his tie, and he said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Agra. I'm an oncologist. I prefer to use last names with my patients. I find that it's a degree of respect that is important for me. And my mother leans over, takes him by the tie, and goes along the story. These are the stories you can't make up because you think, no, this young boy, because what's he gonna do? And she says, brace yourselves, one of these, you can say cancer, you can say Esther. You have to clap now, that's the story. So, how in the world does that look back to us? Intimacy. It's a frightening thing. It's a frightening thing to take those extra moments to look someone in the eye, to say, this is who I am, to tolerate discomfort, to pause and think of consequences, to take the time. Those are the gifts that these little rectangular things made of books and leather, things that 100 years ago were so familiar and now becoming more rare. That's what they give us. Well, I thank you for your time today. We're going to have enough time, since I hoped it would be sort of what humanities based, to do a few minutes of Q&A if you'd like. If you'd like to take a moment.
Two real quick questions. One, somebody asked me to ask you, when you do your national public radio interviews, where are you sitting or where are you located when you do that? Is it over the air?
I come to Atlanta, to East State Public Radio, and we do adapt, and they just overnight it to the NPR studios in D.C.
Cool.
Yes, it's usually weekend edition, all things considered.
Yeah.
Occasionally I rate a weekday.
And is your work shared in Cuba? Do people in Cuba know of your work and read in that translated back to Spanish?
No, I don't know that they do. Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. Not through any agency that I know of. But that's a good question. It opens up all kinds of other questions. Oh, I don't know, Mr. Watson.
I've got one question. This is Hughes, the library guy.
Next. Funny boy. Well, you know that in that book, she keeps her tail. At the end, she turns into a library goddess, but she keeps her ladder dragon tail because, every librarian has to be a little bit of a dragon. But the new book, The Library Dragon Retires, is actually about technology coming to the library. And she's just about to retire. She's going to go do a walking tour of the libraries of the world. She's rather grandiose. When she arrives one day, all the books are gone. Unless you think that this is science fiction. In Texas, they have now opened the first bookless library. Your armpits should be juicy. I mean, they should just froth should be building. Yes. Is effectively kind of. Well, look at blogging. I don't know if you heard the question. How do and again, this is anyone can opine, an idiot can opine, but how do I think the instantaneous nature of the role of much of what the young people are doing and reading and experiencing now affecting the literature that they're writing. And that's a two-part question, of course. You know, it depends on what they're writing. Bloggers are one example. I'm an editor, so I go onto the blogging sites, and I get all these nervous twitches, you know. I just want to go in and put semicolons where they belong, and remove ridiculous dashes, you know. They're so presumptuous most of the time anyway. And make sure, and for heaven's sakes, in the UK, you put your quotation marks, you know, never mind, I don't have to say it, right? Our quotation marks are inclusive at the end of a sentence. It doesn't matter if the last word is the word that's actually quoted, you still put period and so forth. Oh, it just means, I'm sorry. I'm just a cunt. So when they're doing this kind of course, IMing, have you ever stood behind a young person when they're IMing? Oh, it'll just make your head spin. You'll be doing like a Linda Blair. But that doesn't mean that some of those same young people do not understand the mechanics of language. You know, they don't understand parsing and dactyls and syntax. Many of them do. And readers are readers. Readers and writers have certain natures, I believe. And good writing is still good writing. And I think you still see, you know, I don't think the sentences are getting shorter to reflect, you know, the fact that attention spans occasionally are. It takes a great deal of time and attention and diligence to write a novel, for example. And that isn't done by someone who has, you know, the attention span of an ad. Most of the time. Although I've read a couple. Great book, by the way, Shadow of the Wind. Has anyone read it yet? Right. My daughter, she had to. There must be this. Pure, absolutely nothing but pure indulgence. Like this is an indulgence reading. When you have that day, right? When you have that trip, or you have that whatever it is, that moment, that parenthesis in your life. Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafán. Z as in zoo, A, F as in Frank, R-A-N as in no. And although this wasn't a question, I want to just offer this 30-second sort of pencil sketch. The opening chapter is a young boy whose father is taking him through the rabbit's warren of the streets that are Barcelona. It is after World War II, so the communists and the fascists are at each other. The world hasn't really changed much, and we think it has, but it hasn't. Everybody's about here somewhere. Or at least the people with microphones seem to be out here. The rest of us are somewhere in here saying, we need to feed our children, we need good health care, we need... So, never mind. Soldier on. They reach a door, and when they reach this door on a quiet street with a small light outside, the father gives a series of syncopated knocks, and the door opens, and a voice says, after turning several gears left and right, hurry, entren, rápido. They close the door, and the boy steps in. He looks up into what looks like the inside of a skep, a beehive, the old kind. Sort of the way these wonderful, the architecture here, only it would go both ways. And flying buttresses on the inside. And it's a library. And these long, extended ladders were old men that were friends of his father's, because his father was an antiquarian bookseller. People he's known all his young life are there, but he's never seen them in this place. And he says to his father, where are we? And instead of answering, the old man says for him, welcome to the library, no, to the cemetery of forgotten books. It's the most wonderful book. So, I mean, that's what happens with the first 2 pages, so I didn't ruin anything for you. Again, it's just pure pleasurable reading and some beautiful languages. Hit the bestsellers around the world, it's like in 32 languages now. So if you get a chance, do you have time for one more question? I promise I won't just prate on like that about some book. No guts, no glory. Yes.
In terms of noticing particularly people who are coming from I've been so impressed with the ability of computers to teach because it is a language.
Rosetta Stone, it's an exquisite language program, for example.
Do you see this as something that should be encouraged?
Well,
Sometimes we read books,
No, that's a very, very good question and makes me mindful then of clarifying something that may have misunderstood. I'm not quite at the point where I think we need to be dumping our iBooks, I have one, and into the village square and being torch carrying, villagers and burning them. My concern is really almost exclusively with children's libraries and having computers and having programs available to them in a room adjacent to the library, perhaps even with glass that's clearly labeled, computer lab or whatever, but having the children's library be, in fact, the Waldorf schools don't even allow the children's libraries to have any kind of computerization. And you were mentioning specifically language programs for second language people. I just bought one of the Rosetta Stone programs to learn Italian, and I think they're wonderful and useful, and it's the same FIRE theory. We wouldn't give it up, would we? But how do we use it, and how do we check it? And has it exponentially grown so that we just assume that it should be everywhere in our lives? We don't scarcely think of having a life without our cell phone anymore. Because for me, my elderly parents can reach me, my daughters can reach me. We have the rationalizations are there. However, so are choices. I like choices. Yes, ma'am.
I've been sitting here in a nervous stomach
I'm so sorry.
because I don't want to miss.
Do.
You've got a book there about Christian forgiveness. That never happened.
Right.
And the only reason why the Jews got out of their minds is because the Germans turned their backs and left them. The only ones who got out were the ones who had enough money people. And I know that that you say that. I mean, you don't say that, but you do say that this is a legend. And it didn't happen.
Well, I also make a list of the things that did happen that are documented.
And that it's important to have the idea that this could happen. And I do, but it bothers me. It bothers me for 8 million people. Well, Schindler's List bothers me too, When the showers came on, water didn't come out of the shower. And how do you, what bothers me? How do you,
Right. Well, Schindler's List, I'll let Spielberg answer for you.
no, I'm sorry.
But but I understand. I mean, and if I assume that what you're saying with Schindler's List was the fact that there was an inaccuracy in the film about what actually happened within the showers, that water didn't come out, that only the cyclone came out. I think a film as life-changing for many people as that would be forgiven as small, because there are going to be inaccuracies, unfortunately. A picture book's a different thing, and that's a very good question. I don't think, first of all, that you work on anything, nor put yourself out in the world if you're not willing to also answer the questions about your work. When I first heard the story, it was in 1996. I was told the story at a festival by a gentleman who would not stop talking to me while I was trying to listen to another speaker. I wasn't able to find him again. It was the National Storytelling Festival. And when I returned home, I began researching King Christian X of Denmark and the legend that he had worn a yellow star in solidarity with his subjects. I called the Danish embassy, and they sent me more information than I could ever have wanted, because that's what an embassy does. I had 3 days of faxes. I heard the girl say, "What did you do?" And he said, "Just collate. I don't know." And I read incredible stories. I would argue with you that actually the Danes of Denmark did not escape because the Germans turned their backs. The Danes of Denmark escaped because the Danes in fishing boats, because there was a group of Danish fishermen, and I interviewed one of them in person, and 3 others, 2 through email, 1 through letters, were actually the Helsingborg Sewing Club, as they call themselves, which is a wonderful name for big burly fishermen, smuggled out nearly 7,000 some of the Jewish citizens of Denmark. Of the 500 some that were left, and all this is in the author's note at the back, which is very, but it's important that they know as well, and that, and I think, I want to tell you that I think it was very forthright that you asked me. And so, that's why I want to be able to answer. 500 and some of the Jews that went to Theresienstadt. Some died there, but not one Danish citizen was transferred to Auschwitz or any of the death camps. And the reason, what they made up, the reason for that is because of the absolute, relentless campaign on behalf of the Danes for each of their citizens. And one of the things they did is they sent packages and they had them sent to each specific person. So that way they had to be signed for. And that allowed them to know if that person was still living. And this information came through the Holocaust Museum. The Danes that returned to Denmark, and except for Bulgaria, I think it was Bulgaria, yes, of all places, Denmark is, I believe, the only country, Bulgaria did some, where Danes did not return to any holding camps. In Denmark, Danes returned to homes that had been tended. Their gardens maintained, their houses swept, their animals fed. So these stories to me were remarkable. Now, Lois Lowry wrote a beautiful book, which you may be familiar with. Okay, and I mentioned it. Has anyone read Lois Lowry's A Number of the Stars? If you've read The Yellow Star, and this does interest you, Lois Lowry wrote a book about the actual smuggling of the Jews, and I mentioned it in this. This is a legend. I did not create this legend. I didn't come up with it, nor did I say, this is a true story. This is a legend that's been told orally and is even told in tours of Israel. King Christian X is considered a righteous Gentile in Israel because of his absolute open support of Jews. There is no proof whatsoever, and I've always been very clear about this, that the King of Denmark ever wore a yellow star. What we do know is that there were citizens and there are documents that say that he threatened to wear it if ever the issue of the yellow star was pressed in Denmark because they were only Danes there. So why retell a legend? Why not? This was a powerful story. This is a myth. Why do we create them? Do legends only come to us like the mists of time from Avalon? Or do they not happen while we live? And if they do, why do they happen? And I think that conversations like this are critical. They happen because what did happen in World War II was so horrific that people created myth. They created a world where a king became a Jew. And when I ask what would happen if that's what we did today, is because I believe that is the purpose of myth. It doesn't tell us who we were. It tells us who we should be. There are times in life when history does not give us a roadmap, and history is littered with those cases. And that's where story comes in. And that's why I love myth. And that's why I believe that story is important. And I stand proudly by it. But I understand all their concerns. I am nonetheless unapologetic. But I thank you. All right. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sure we will. But there'll be different myths created by different people. The question was, will we create a myth out of our invasion of Iraq? We will all have mythology that we create. And have we not already? And yet, why do we? I think that the difficult questions that we are facing are less easily answered by taking positions. I know from my own family's experience, my parents were socialists who helped, did their small part in the Cuban Revolution. They had dreams of a social democracy in Cuba. But after 4 years, where newspaper editors disappeared, and college professors vanished, where there was the national paper and the national radio, national television. They brought us to a place filled with contradictions, to a country that is very flawed, but a country that is very great. Because we have the right here to say, we don't want this war, or we don't want this president, or we will not stand for this, or you may not speak for me. The refugee shouldn't be the one having to tell you that. I know these are difficult times. That's where greatness comes from in people. It rarely comes when things are just fine and dandy, you know. One last question, make it an easy one. I'm begging you. Yes. Does my mother still love the park? Oh dear God. Those of you that have no reference to this question, my mother would have me stand in parking spaces and parking lots while she came around to save, so I could save the parking space as a human orange cone. See, that's a high-pitched, nervous sort of laughter that only comes from recognition. I haven't done that in a while. She doesn't drive very much anymore. But that's all right. Yeah. Thank you so much.